What's up, guys? I am James Bainey, and I'm here with Kyle Larson, and we are getting ready to do a spoiler-filled book discussion on Poe Dameron, Free Fall. Stick around. All right, Kyle, we're back again doing the old book.
We are free falling. Yeah,
free falling. Yeah. I had a friend or an acquaintance, I guess, like cover that song, and it was actually like a pretty big hit because he was in I'll just say it was Aaron Gillespie from the Almost. I don't know if anybody knows the band or whatever, but he did a cover of Free Fallin' around, and it was right around the time like we were touring with that band and stuff. So
if you can cover Tom Petty and do it well, that's great, because that's a tough one.
whenever I hear that song, that's the version I think of, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's a good one
for most people. But hey, we're not here to talk about other stuff besides Star Wars. We're here to talk about Star Wars.
Let's get into it.
So the way the book discussions work on a normal basis, we're going to do everything spoiler-free until we're done kind of rating and reviewing the book, and then we'll get into, we'll give you an alert, tell you it's spoiler from this point on, and we'll get into the discussion, right? So before we get started, let's talk a little bit about the stats and where it all falls into place. Poe Dameron, Free Fall was released on August 4th, 2020. It was written by Alex Segura, and it was read by Sean Elias Reyes. Now, the press, the who's releasing the book is Disney Lucasfilm Press, and the audio book is done from Random House Audio. Now, the timeline for this book is kind of interesting. So it's 18 ABY, which is 14 years after Return of the Jedi and 16 years before The Force Awakens. And about, if you're keeping count, about 9 years after the Mandalorian season 1. So somewhere in there. I think that's about right.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Maybe not.
Yeah. I thought it.
I'm not really
sure.
It
might have been 17 before Force Awakens, but it could be 16. I was on the fence between 17 and 16, because I think it was his age was disputed as 32, 33 in that film.
Yeah. So if he's sick. Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, he's born in 2 ABY, and Force Awakens is 34 ABY. So he's
36.
Definitely 32.
Oh, 32.
Yeah.
36.
No.
Yeah, 32.
Yeah. And then, so he's 16 years old in this book, and then another 16 years later, that's The Force Awakens. So
sounds right.
Where I think I messed up the Mandalorian stuff. I didn't write it down, and I did that off the cuff. So
I know.
I'm
I was
probably
like, you're going deep
that.
with the Mandalorian.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was hoping that it would fit in. Like it's exactly during the Mandalorian time or something. But whatever. All right, initial thoughts and score. Done with the timeline thing. Initial thoughts and score. I'm giving this a 7.3. I think I put this book right around the like Rebel Rising and man, I can't think of the other one. I'll look it up here in a second. But somewhere kind of in the lower sevens. I actually thought it was pretty decent. There's definitely parts of this book that I feel are, like, I know it's Star Wars, but I'm kind of like, they're in another battle, We'll get into that stuff. But oftentimes it felt like the best way to get out of a situation was just to say, and then they're suddenly attacked and everybody's running around hectically, and then so-and-so got separated with so-and-so, and that was the only way that they could come up with stuff. So at times I felt like the story was kind of shoehorned, and they're trying to just kind of tell a broad stroke thing, and the details aren't really lining up. That being said, though, I really enjoyed this story, even though I didn't think I was going to. I thought when they announced the book that it was going to tell the backstory which was this like footnote of a thing that everybody was like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense in canon. And then they're like, well, we'll just write a book to explain it. And I thought it might get kind of passed off. But I actually think that I really did enjoy hearing this point of view, not from Poe's angle, but just learning more about Kajimi and the Spice Runners and Zorii Bliss. I think in a weird way, and I'm not getting too into it, but I feel like Lacey or John, one of the two, said it perfectly when they said it should have been Zori's book and Poe Dameron should have been in it. But we'll sort that out later. But 7.3, it's not a bad score. It's definitely on the upside. So what's your rate? What's your review of this book? What do you think?
Wow, mine's a bit lower. I gave it a 5.5, which for me is like a C. And a lot of the problems that you mentioned, in terms of, some of the pacing, the really abrupt action sequences, there's some other things that we'll talk about when we get into spoiler. And the fact that I think you nailed it, and I think what you referenced with Lacey and John saying that is that the best parts of the book, where this book really shines, are when we get into talking about Zorii and we get into talking about the Spice Runners and their kind of organization, their place in the galaxy. And I absolutely agree, this would have been a much more enjoyable book if there would have been more emphasis on that, and also more emphasis on some of the character development that seems to kind of get skirted over. Whether we're talking about, whether if it's a battle or other choices that the author made, that really took away from the enjoyment for me, in terms of that. I don't think it's a terrible book, but I did feel a lot of times like, where is the story here? Like, what am I doing here? There's some really fantastic moments. I don't think that Alex Segura is like a bad writer. I just feel like this book was very rushed. And that, it just moves at like this hyper, I think I wrote in my review, like it makes the Rise of Skywalker look glacial in terms of pace, because this book just moves so fast. And, when you're trying to tell these character stories, these character moments, that's a warrant to like slow it down a little bit. I mean, we've seen a million space battles in Star Wars, you don't have to cram them in there. And that really took away from the enjoyment. So yeah, an average book, not a terrible book, but definitely not one that I would really place high on people recommending, or that I would recommend to readers.
Gotcha.
So,
okay, cool. That being said, we both rated it, we both reviewed it, at least to this degree. Let's get into full-on spoilers. First thing I do want to talk about is, what was your favorite part or favorite thing of this book?
Well, it has to be a tie between, I really, really liked Zori's character, her story, what she was doing. Are we in spoilers yet? We can't really. Okay.
Yes.
So the fact that she's kind of climbing this organization, the Spice Runners, and you don't really know why she's doing this. You don't really know too much about her backstory until the very end, and then it just clicks like that. I thought that was really well done. And then I also really loved the NRSB security officer, Sela Troon. Even though she's not in the book a ton, I thought that was a really cool character, and I was like, that would be a great story as well, or a way to kind of explore what's going on in this uncharted part of the galaxy. So those two characters really, for me, kind of whenever they showed up, I was always like, all right, cool, let's do this. So how about yourself?
Yeah. I think my favorite part or favorite thing about the book was, you're saying from the Zorii perspective. I'm actually thinking from the Ziva perspective. I thought the character of Ziva being the mysterious head of it, and the fact that it's her mom and she's the one wearing the gold helmet and stuff like that. She's the one that's kind of plotting this whole thing. And I think like one of my parts that I was probably listening at the most attentive was when she showed up, revealed, it's my daughter, and then in a matter of seconds, like, kills Tommaso and is like, you two in, that guy out. Like, and it
was very Godfather.
I was like, this is crazy. Like, all of a sudden now there's new interest in this story, because I don't know. Like, I think at this point in the book, it wasn't supposed to be this huge reveal, but it still kind of felt like it was, because they told you who the mole was, but then she comes in and kills this character, and it made me think. It made me think that they were kind of trying to be like, oh, well, he was a mole too, you know, the way because I was believing it. I was like, oh, dang, he was the one who was leaking information as well as the other character, you know. So
Miranda Gann.
So I was actually pretty. Yeah, she's a Twi'lek character, and I thought that was so interesting, and then. Now I know this is two parts of the book then, but then the reveal at the end that Sela was like, you know, twisting everything and made Ziva think that it was the other person. I just thought all that stuff was really fascinating.
Yeah.
The whole plot twist there. Let's talk. So you say you had maybe issues with pacing and stuff. What's the big spoiler detail there? Get into the detail.
So the time jumps, I really feel like so part of the story is that they're establishing a romantic relationship between Zorii and Poe there, but it's really done in like a very watered down way, and I felt like they could have you know, if they were going to do that, they shouldn't have done these time jumps as much, you know, where months go by and we're led to believe that like their bond has strengthened somehow, like, you know, tell us that story. Because I really feel like the amount of the events and the action in this book, you know, we're talking about a book that's like, you know, 8 to 12 months of time goes by. But really, I felt like, you know, this is like 2 weeks worth of content here, like 2 weeks worth of story, because they kept jumping. To me, I was always like, I'd like to know a little bit more about this relationship. If you're going to go with a romance, you know, like give us a romance story. Don't just give us like, oh, they held hands once in a while and a couple times they kissed, and that's supposed to like, you know, because I feel like, again, like they didn't necessarily need to give us a watered down romance to strengthen that bond. That, you know, when she offers, like in the Rise of Skywalker, and she's like, you could come with me, you know, that's, to me, I would think more after reading this book that she's more saying that to him as a friend rather than like somebody that she's in love with or anything. And I felt like they really that Segura really kind of missed the mark there and could have gone more. I mean, especially for a teen romance as well, too, because it felt like So those were the issues that I had with the pacing and things like that. Is it left out a lot of character development for me.
So interestingly, I do understand what you're saying, but in a weird way, I'm kind of against that a little bit, because I thought, say you want to say that this time that he spends with the Spice Runners is, you know, it's not 2 weeks, but it is over the course of a year. You would have to at some point say, well, 3 months later, well, 5 months later, well, 8 months later. And I thought, just if that would have been buried in the middle of a chapter, it would have been pretty lost. But I felt like they were pretty clear at the beginning of these time jumps that they were like, I've now been with the Spice Runners for 8 months. 8 months have passed, you know, and they're pretty clear on how much time is going by. So I felt like they handled the passage of time fairly well, other than the fact that, and this is kind of where I agree with you, is that it doesn't feel like a lot happened in between the time. So, and it's almost fair to say, it's like, well, they're only telling you the highlights of those, you know, 8 to 12 months. But it does kind of feel like it's like we had a crazy adventure, and then 6 months later, we had a crazy adventure. And it's like, well, I don't know. it kind of feels like, well, what happened in between?
Totally.
You know? So sometimes I see what you're saying. The time jumps are kind of weird, but I will say I felt like this was handled 1,000 times better than books that are skipping back and forth between times.
Yeah.
That stuff drives me nuts, and I get very confused on who's talking and who's in the scene. And I felt, for the most part, this book is almost always Poe and Zorii. It's their story. Every once in a while, they'd cut over to like Kess, or every once in a while, they cut over to Troon. But for the most part, you just know that when you're starting another chapter, you're just starting the next part of their adventure together. Where I actually had problems with the book and the story as a whole was just the sheer fact that it looked like they, it seemed to me like they wrote the book out and they wrote, well, this needs to happen, this needs to happen, this needs to happen, this needs to happen. And then they were like, well, how do we get from A to B? Well, they're like, well, I don't know, how do we split up these characters? And they just randomly will get into a fight. I felt like so often it was like they got away, then they're getting shot at by somebody. And in some cases, there's even one specifically where it's the Kess and Lulo show up and they're like, hey, you need to come home now. And Zori's like, no, you need to come with me. And then instead of resolving this in an emotional way, they just said, then they randomly get attacked by some local green aliens that literally are just like part of the planet, and they're not even that harmful. They're not even really that sentient. They just attack them, and Kess gets hurt, and in the midst of the battle, Poe says, just take my dad to go get healed, and I'm going to go back with the Spice Runners for now. And it's like, that's such a weak way to, no pun intended on the alien species, weak way.
Yeah. Oh, I got it. Gotcha.
But it's such a weak way to avoid confrontation. So you're like, I have this really cool moment where there's going to be this huge character moment for Poe where he's going to have to make this decision. And then it's like, he doesn't have to make the decision because we're just going to make it easy and just say they got attacked and they all got mixed up in the mix and then they went their separate ways.
Yeah.
And this, I'm telling you, it happens like 7 times in this book. I mean, if you're at this point now, you probably read the book or you watched our other video where we just basically told you everything that happened. But we even skipped over some of these battles sometimes because it was like, they got attacked again, and then they split up. And then when they were on their way out, they got attacked again. And then, they were trying to get away out of that thing, and we thought they got away, but then they were attacked again by other random Spice Runners and random stuff all the time. And I was like, this is not good. I don't like them being attacked constantly by just random people that don't have any real relevance to the story. I should be done rambling on that particular thing.
I agree. Totally agree.
So, I mean, I think those are some of our like negative points. Let's talk a little bit about what maybe intrigued us about the story. So, Kajimi, right? We get some history of Kajimi and how it used to be like this religious planet, and more about how the whole planet just kind of in general runs now to suffice the Spice Runners, right? What did you think of the story behind the Spice Runners of Kijimi?
I thought that was cool. I liked they threw in some kind of, there was a temple, right, on Kajimi that they noticed as well. There was like a temple kind of out in the distance, and then they also threw in that this organization is vast, but that no one really knows who's in charge until you are part of the organization. It's very like from the top down kind of, I don't know if you'd say like splintered in a way or cellular in a way, but you get the sense that like it's all these kind of little fish acting like big fish who actually do report to the big big fish leader. And yeah, I liked that too. I liked how it gave it like some mystique, and you couldn't really trust anybody that you were reading about. I just kind of, maybe it's the solo mentality or whatever, but I just assumed all these people were kind of out to get one another until, you finally get to Kajimi, and then that's when the real like double, triple crosses start to happen and stuff like that. So it was set up beautifully, like, in terms of that, in that regard. So, and I did like the fact that they outlined too that that a lot of these criminal organizations, they don't really distinguish between the Empire and the New Republic, only that the New Republic is actually kind of doing less about their criminality because they're so entrenched in trying to build a government than the Empire ever did, really. Like, they actually would kind of just work with the Empire, but the New Republic they don't even have to do that at this point. So the state of the galaxy for the criminal elements.
So I think my overall takeaway from the book, and I kind of mentioned this once before, is like, I think the fact that it's called it's like Poe Dameron is the main character, I feel like that's a little bit of a kind of a misleading factor here.
Yeah.
It almost makes me feel then that they were like, they did look at it in fact as like, hey, J.J. Abrams is gonna make Poe have a history of being a spice runner, but that doesn't really match up with the canon that we already had. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna write the book that's called Poe Dameron, His Backstory. So you now know his backstory,
yes.
Right? And it feels like they're saying, here you go, here's your answers. And I feel they should have probably handled it a little bit differently, a little bit, I mean, better in my opinion, but who am I to say? But I think the way that it probably should have been done is to say, hey, we are going to give you those answers in turn when we tell you a little bit more about Zorii. And calling the book Zorii Bliss, Spice Runner of Kijimi, and Poe Dameron happens to be in it as like a young recruit that they bring in, and you're like, oh, I see how this all ties in. But since the book to me isn't like, I don't feel like I'm learning more about Poe. I feel like I'm learning more about Kajimi and Zorii and the Spice Runners. So they should have leaned on that and called the book her story. But for some reason it's called Poe's, and I feel like that is, I don't know, like they're saying like, we'll sell more if we call it Poe Dameron.
Yeah,
if it's Oscar Isaac's book, we'll sell more.
100%
so
agree.
There's something weird about that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Because go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just saying I 100% agree with that. I would totally buy a book called Zorii Bliss and the Spice Runners of Kijimi. Please write that book, somebody. Yeah. I'll read it. So,
well, yeah. I mean, there's still, this book obviously sets up a lot of time that they could still tell a fun story with her in between the events with Poe and the events of Rise of Skywalker. But I am going to ask you this question too. Do you think that because now we know a little bit more about the history of these two characters, does this taint your viewing of the Rise of Skywalker, or does it make it better?
I wouldn't say it does either, really. It does, like, it does make that moment between them when they're sitting on the roof and, she has her visor down and they're talking. It definitely adds a lot of weight to that moment for me. I thought it was great acting from Kerry Russell, the first time I saw the film too. Like, that was one of the moments I really enjoyed where her and Poe kind of talking just about how awful things are. And so it definitely adds to that. And we really do, or I really got a sense of, the amount of time that's passed. They were kids when they met. And, the book ends so abruptly with his at least with the end of their story. I mean, he literally, like, he's like, bye. He didn't even say bye. I think she's just like, don't come back or something. And just, that's it. And you're like, oh my God.
The second to last chapter is still like the final battle. Yeah. And I'm like, what is happening? Like, how are they going to wrap this up with only like, I flipped to the last, I was doing the audiobook thing. The last chapter's only like 6 minutes. I'm like, he just walked away. Yeah. Like, how are they going to wrap this up in 6 minutes? Yeah.
Yeah, it's cold. So yeah, it doesn't really like, I mean, for the Rise of Skywalker overall, it doesn't really kind of swing me one way or the other, but for that moment, that it really does, and it really, I like the backstory that it adds to Zorii. So again, like your point underscored that this is more of a Zorii story, or this served her character a lot more than
so. Yeah, so this is interesting then, because this isn't why or totally the reason, but I like that you gave the book a 5.5, I gave it a 7.3, and you could almost apply those scores to how much we think it actually affects our viewing of Rise of Skywalker. You're like, it really doesn't, but maybe a little bit, and I'm like,
yeah.
My opinion is, I actually think it does. Good. I wouldn't say it's like a 10 out of 10, like, oh, I think of the movie just so differently now, right? But it's right in that point where it does nothing for me, really, and it's a total game changer. It's like that 7.5, right? To me, I feel that there's no way that I can watch The Rise of Skywalker again when Zorii is or Kajimi is ever on screen and not be affected by what I know now in this story, right? Even not so when it's like, there's a droid smith on Kajimi, and Poe's like, oh man, it had to be Kajimi. I'm like, now that line means something to me,
yeah.
Right? He shows up, he's looking around, and he gets knocked down by her, and she's like, I want to what did she say? Like, I want to blast your head, your brains everywhere, or something like that.
Something like that.
Just those lines mean more. Working with Babu, that means more to me. What you said, the stuff on the roof, and like, when did the raid start? How do we get out of here? Like, all of a sudden, I have so much more emphasis for all that stuff. I just feel like it means so much more now because I know their history and I know what she's been through. Even later in the movie, they blow up Kajimi.
Yeah.
You know? Oh, and I'm like, if you read this book and then you watch that movie, not that you would, who would do that, right? But you read the book and then you watch the movie for the first time, you would see this as, in a way, like the Zorii's live action debut, and you're like, oh man, this is crazy. Yeah, this is where the story left off. And when you see Kajimi blow up, you're like, dang, man, that's pretty impactful considering the novel that I just read. So I don't know. I mean, for me, I'm like, I think that it definitely changes the way I view the book. It's not super revolutionary because it doesn't change everything about the movie. It only really affects this one part. But yeah, that's my opinion on its Rise of Skywalker connection.
Yeah.
Do you think that we're gonna get another book, like I mentioned before, like more Zorii Bliss? Like, do you think this book hit right?
I hope so. I would really feel like it'd be a huge wasted opportunity if they didn't, because the common thread that I've seen in the reviews that I've read and other folks that I've talked to besides yourself is that, Zorii really is the strength of this book, and that, her story is what really shines in this book, for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So I think if fans are vocal enough about it, that they will, they would do that. It seems like we have a ways to go before whatever the next, aside from the High Republic, whatever next phase of Star Wars we're entering in. So, why not, if we're going to explore some more sequel trilogy characters, I think she would be a great one to include in that. I think a comic series would be a hell of a lot of fun with her kind of taking over for her mom and things like that. So that would be that I would, again, like, they have one right now called Bounty Hunter, which I don't really care for very much, but I feel like, if you give us Zorii and these new elements of criminality that we haven't really seen in a galaxy that's in a state of flux, that's essentially lawless as it was, in the time of Solo, that would be really cool. And you could also kind of have sprinkle in little First Order stuff as they're starting to emerge. So I don't know. Mm-hmm. And it could be great.
Yep. So the thing that I was mentioning earlier, I said I kind of stuck it in my ranking around Rebel Rising.
Okay.
It's actually interesting, and I didn't realize this at the time, but I have it as Rebel Rising, Poe Dameron, Freefall, Most Wanted right below it. And I was like, all three of those books are, here's the main property or the main movie.
Yeah.
And then this is kind of the one of or the main character's backstory or like rise to how they became the character they are in that specific thing, with Rebel Rising being Jyn Erso's kind of character development, Poe Dameron, Freefall being, Poe Dameron's, and Most Wanted being Han and Kira's. Kind of growing up together and what and how they got to be where they are when Solo starts. So it's kind of interesting. I guess inadvertently those types of books just seem to be similar enough to me that I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's pretty decent. It's not the best, but it does something for me. It's not a 5 in my personal opinion, but that's where the ranking is. This is a junior novelization, right?
Yeah.
What's the right term? Young adult is what I'm going for. Do you have other Star Wars books that maybe are kind of similar in your opinion?
Well, I agree with you.
What would you recommend?
I thought of Most Wanted a lot because I thought so much of Solo while I was reading this too. But yeah, I would totally agree with you with Most Wanted, the comparison there. And one thing I thought about as you were kind of talking about those other ancillary titles is that I wonder if I would have received this, or if I would have read this differently if this had come out in the Journey to the Rise of Skywalker materials, even though Poe is heavily featured in a lot of those. But if this would have been, here's this cool Zorii character, and here's where she came from.
Another smart move, man. That would have been so different, because you would have went in and it was like you were a Spice Runner, and it's like, yes, I know this. I now feel connected to this, and just what I was describing earlier. Like it's funny. We said this, and I didn't even realize you put it so perfectly. Who would have done this? Who reads this book and then watches Rise of Skywalker for the first time? Everyone, if they would have done it exactly like you're saying. This should have been a Journey to the Rise of Skywalker.
But
yes, learn Zorii, learn Poe Dameron's shady history.
Because it feels like a checklist now that we're reading it after the fact, like what you mentioned too. It feels like okay, there's the hyperspace skipping check, like that kind of thing. And that was what felt really tedious to me as I was reading. It's like, oh, okay, she found a Y-wing. Wonder when we're going to see that again,
See, that's the kind of thing. Like they did the same thing for Phasma too. They released Phasma after The Force Awakens, and I was like, you watch. Say you read this book and you were like, lightspeed skipping. That's interesting. That's stuff they do in the books.
Yeah,
they don't ever do that stuff in the movies. Like, that's just like, that's book canon, right? But then they do it in live action. Like, it's something from a book that gets put on the screen, and you're like, oh, this is great. This is what we want. This is our investment paying off when we see it in the movie. And it feels like we know so much more about the world, that we have an advantage over every other fan that's just going in the movie blind, because we have this immediate connection to lightspeed skipping. But now you're right, when they do it after the fact, when they release another book and they show you how he, did X or Y, you're like, oh, I mean, that's neat.
Yeah.
You didn't really think of that. It's not an original idea, It's just kind of, You're just telling me.
Yeah,
you just made up a story around the situation. So
you're explaining.
I think this is about it.
So.
Yeah, I think we're probably at that point where we've discussed it out. Unless there's anything else you want to add, anything?
There is one thing I would like to add. I'll try to make it brief, but I think it was a huge mistake that they killed off Shara Bey, who is one of the heroes of the rebellion, taught Poe how to fly, and didn't include her in this story because I think it was a really cheap writing move to add this underlying tension to Poe and Kes, and they could have still had the same tension, this same kind of drama if Shara had been there, and it would have been even heightened because, you know, it would have been both of them being like, hey, we fought so you don't have to fight, so you don't have to do these type of things. And then Shara could have been part of that chase to go find him and track him down. And I was really disappointed and blown away that they killed a character that they've established really well in Shattered Empire. She's in the new ongoing Star Wars series. I feel like there's something else that she's in that I'm forgetting, but she's, you know, I don't know. We don't know what happened to her. You know, we know that she crashed, but we don't know, you know, really what more story that has to come. But it was really disappointing to me that she wasn't included. And like, please stop killing moms in Star Wars, please, because lots of moms are dying, and I just feel like that was a huge, that could have had a really good role. She could have had a really good role in the story. So that's my last thing that I'll add.
Yeah,
that was something that really bugged me.
I don't really have any opinion either way. I was unsure at this point if that was a new reveal, like when she died or give an approximate date, or if it was one of those things where it's like, hey, when you start this story, just know that his mom's already dead. We already covered that in other canon. I was unsure at the time, but if what you're saying is right, then it was the choice of the author to kill the character so that she wasn't in it.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. It's whatever. Or at least it's whatever to me. It's not whatever to
me.
You and other people.
I know. I just know it put myself and a lot of other readers off too, because I think a lot of people want more of her story, and they set up a very happy ending. So, but I won't get too much into it. But I just had to definitely say that was a huge. That was definitely something that knocked my review down as well. So.
I trust Star Wars, you know, when it comes to that type of stuff. Like if there is enough people out there that was kind of like, man, this author decided to kill her. All right, well, here's what we'll do. We'll stick her in squadrons or something like that. Or we'll make her more of a main character, and we'll tell her death, you know, in a something specific, you know what I mean, later down the line, and not just to write her off. But that, I think, is going to wrap it on this book discussions. I thought it was a pretty good one. Not here nor there. It's not the best.
It doesn't really.
It's somewhere in the middle.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a story. It's more Star Wars, and you know, I don't know if that closes out our sequel trilogies stuff, but yeah.
Where can people find you online if they wanna chat?
So
I'll talk to you more about this book.
You can sound off in the comments. I'll try to check them. Haven't been great about that, but I'll try to be better. You can also find me. I write for Star Wars Newsnet, doing comic and book reviews, and I'm also contributing to What the Force Show, their news site as well. And eventually I'll probably be back on Twitter. I'm on a little bit of a deactivation hiatus, but when I'm back, you can find me. I'm Kyle D. Larson, D as in dog.
Mm-hmm. So. For me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Myra Trunks. And you can also find me on the Resistance Broadcast. That's a show I do with my pals John and Lacey. It's basically a podcast that we do twice a week, covering Star Wars news and discussion and other things like that.
Boy, that lightsaber battle was heated. Can I just say? I listened recently the Star Wars war, the lightsaber discussion. Wow. I was like, I better turn this down. My neighbors are gonna complain.
Yeah, if you don't know about the show, one of the things we did recently is we did a Star Wars war, where we each pick a topic, not a topic, but like we choose a topic and we each pick a side, and then we just like battle it out. And the point is that we almost don't even believe what we're saying. We're just trying to ridicule the other person's point. It's more comedic and more fun than it is supposed to be like an analysis of which one is actually better. It's kind of like, if you were to pick that Anakin versus Obi-Wan is the best fight in Star Wars, I would just be like, it's the stupidest fight. And it's like, I like that fight, you know?
Yeah.
I would just be like, that's the worst fight I've ever seen, No,
it was good.
It's more about knocking down the other people than it is about trying to build up your point.
Totally, yeah. I kept being like, whoa. Yeah, but it's a lot of fun. Yeah, the Resistance is great. Totally check them out. So
cool. All right, well, that's it. Until the next book comes out, thanks for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe. Let's have a chat in the comments, and let us know if you like the book, what you rate it, how you review it, everything. Let's just get into the comments, talk about it, and till the next book, like I said, we'll see you later.
Bye. Thanks for watching, everyone.